My disability has stopped me doing so many things. The times when I longed as a child to be able to dribble past someone with a football, to cycle a bike without babyish stabilisers on them, to climb trees, to walk to school with my friends instead of being pushed there in a wheelchair by my ma, to bring my dog for a walk on his lead, to take stairs two at a time instead of climbing onto the banister rail, or if there wasn't a rail, by arsing my way down. To not be constantly worrying that my caliper might break, and to fear the physical pain and mental solitude I would feel and face while waiting for it to be fixed. To look at girls admiringly, and yes, lustfully, while my hormones were racing uncontrollably around my young body, and to long for them to look back at me in a similar way, rather than ignoring me as that disabled young fella. Words of my next guest, Gerry Maguire, who was born with spina bifida. When he was born, his mother was told he would never walk and was advised by the doctor to put him in a home and forget about him. But she refused to listen and spent the rest of her life, literally, fighting for her son's independence and happiness. In his book, Walk Away and Forget Him, Gerry talks about his lifelong struggle with his disability, his battles with alcoholism and depression, and the unwavering love of a mother who helped him through it all. He joins us now in studio. Gerry, good morning.
Good morning, Gerry.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
A very brave book, and coming from a perspective and an angle that most people with disability dare not even consider. You have decided that it's bollocks, to use your own words. It's not good being where you are. It never was and it never will be. That almost separates you completely from nearly everybody else who's written about disability, either first hand or third hand. Why did you decide to write this way?
Well, I had a choice of giving a sanitised version and a PC version of what it's like to have a disability. And I know I would have been really annoyed with myself if I'd have done that. So I decided to call it as it was. As you used the word, it is a load of bollocks to have a serious disability. It stops you doing so many things. And I'm not talking about monumental things. I'm talking about the simple things in life, like playing football as a kid with my friends on the road. I played football to my level, but in my head, I played a different game of football. I was the best footballer in the world and still am the best footballer in the world. But my disability did then and always will stop me transferring thoughts from my head to my feet. And that simple thing, as you said in your intro there, even climbing stairs, the simple act of wondering when you go to a building, are you going to be able to get into that building? I'd love to have the thought that you didn't have to worry about silly things like that. But they are a constant preoccupation. Whenever I'm invited to places, as throughout my life, I've always had to go on recce's to see if the building was accessible. I mean, people might think that's amazing. In 2009, every building should be accessible. That's not the case. And particularly before buildings became more accessible than they are now, it was a pain in the neck going to places and then panicking if you were invited to a wedding or something like that, and the hotel was not accessible. How do you tell your friend,
I can't go. Can't get in.
And you don't want to say it like that.
I could sit outside and look.
Yeah. But you don't want to kind of... I'm not a disabled person in my head. I don't like my disability. That's putting it very mildly. So I wouldn't like to use that as a reason for not being able to go to a wedding. So some of the stupid excuses I came up with, I have a dicky tummy or something like that, or my mother needs to go to the hospital or something like that. When really and truly the reason was the building is completely inaccessible to me. I'm going to be panicking for the few days beforehand. I'm going to be relieved so much that it'll take me a few days to recover from it. So I can't go.
Take me back to when you were a child and getting to school and what it was like being in school. And, I was shocked and yet I wasn't shocked when I read about bullying. Serious bullying, really nasty stuff from one guy in particular.
Yeah. Well, this guy, obviously, he was lacking in the intelligence front, so he took that out in me as a soft target. I couldn't move away from him physically. So I was basically a stationary target for him. And he revelled in that. He did revel in it.
And what used he do to you? How old were you at this stage?
I would have been it would have been a 5th and 6th class in primary, so I would have been maybe 10, 11, 12.
Were you in a wheelchair or in calipers?
No, I was in calipers.
So you were moving around?
I was moving around.
With difficulty, but still moving.
Not moving to the extent that Usain Bolt would move or something like that, but I was moving around to the best of my capabilities. And obviously I was not moving around quickly enough to escape from him. So
you were also in calipers, so you were
yeah,
good and different, easy to spot.
Big time, yeah. And I mean, he used to stand in front of me. This guy was a big guy, physically a big guy. He may have been 11 and 12, but he looked 16 or 17. And he'd stand in front of me and tell me how miserable my life was and how miserable I must be, and look the way you walk and things like that. And I'd try and move away from him with a hell of a lump in my throat. And that would be my preoccupation. Just don't cry in front of him, And as I tried to move away from him, he'd move in front of me, and then I'd start to panic, and invariably I'd fall over, and he'd get a great kick out of this, So it wasn't violent.
Did anybody identify this in the school?
I think because of his physique, I think everybody had this idea. Well, thanks be to Christ, it's not me that's going through it. If it's
what
him,
about the teachers? Did the teachers know what was going on?
I struggle to think that the teachers didn't know. Maybe it was just too big an issue for them to...
And that's your lot in life, sure. That's Maguire's lot in life, sure. Yeah. What can we do?
Now, I could be doing them a disservice, but I certainly didn't get any kind of...
You'd imagine, though, if there was a fella in calipers, you'd be keeping a lookout. You'd be saying, just to make sure that fella's okay.
Well, maybe in fairness to them, I didn't want them to keep a lookout. Maybe I didn't want them to be differentiating me from the other guys in the class. So, maybe they were saying, well, does he want us to help him? Does he want to sort it out himself? I don't know. Possibly.
As time went by, your mum eventually ended up having to take you to school when you were going to secondary school.
Mm.
And you hated that. You hated entering the school.
Well, my mother brought me to school in primary, but it was different then because it was on a bus route, so it didn't look as obvious. But the secondary school wasn't on a bus route. And I remember the summer beforehand thinking, how the hell am I going to get there? It's too far to walk.
Yeah.
What if the caliper breaks on the way, I'm screwed then. So my mother, I don't know, God love her, she must have been so reluctant to bring up the idea of getting the wheelchair. And much as I hated to admit it, it was logistically the best way to do it. So we got the wheelchair, and it meant that she pushed me up and down and to the school for the 5 years of secondary. But I did.
Every day?
Yeah, hail, rain and snow. And but it's not good. It's not good for your morale. I mean, I loved my mother to the bits, I really did, and she was doing this for me, but still in all, it separated me from the other guys in the school, and I knew it did, and it made me feel crap, and God love her, I'm sure she knew that.
You were the bloke in the wheelchair.
Absolutely.
And I presume as you got closer and closer to the school every day, the tension must have risen, the anxiety must have risen.
No,
and then you'd be going, I'm nearly there, and as soon as I get there, I'm in the wheelchair. Everybody's going to be looking at me. All the shenanigans about getting out of the wheelchair. And the way you describe it in the book, it never got any better.
No, it didn't, because the first 3 years of secondary, the schooling was done in a prefab. So the prefab was up 3 or 4 steps. And there was no rail at the side of the steps.
Might as well have been 300 steps.
It might as well have been, And I remember my mother, God love her, she said, look, I'll hold on to you as you walk up the steps. But again, that was another visible sign that I just didn't need. So I remember the summer beforehand, I went down on one of my recce's and sussed it out that the best thing to do was literally for me to crawl up to the top of the 3 steps myself. It was better in my mind that I do that rather than have my mother help me up the steps. And I also had this idea that if I stumble going up the steps, I might bring her crashing down. I mean, I'd rather suffer 10 injuries to myself than 1 injury to her. And that was another consideration in my thoughts. But again, there was days when it was raining heavily and I'd still have to crawl up those steps. And I'd get to school, my trousers would be soaking wet from crawling up the steps and so on, And again, at the end of the day, I literally would sit at the top of the steps and drop myself down onto my good right leg to the bottom of the steps, and then my mother would bring the wheelchair down the steps and off we go.
There's a tendency for poets and filmmakers and writers to eulogise these moments and turn them into moments of great inspiration and elation. Songwriters write songs about, friendships that are developed between able-bodied boys and disabled boys. And this is romantic nonsense, really, though, isn't it?
It is. There's no two ways about it, because my day was spent preoccupied with getting through the day in as safe a fashion as possible, rather than enjoying the day the way other kids would do. I mean, the toilets in the first 3 years in primary weren't in that prefab, so I had to not alone negotiate my way down the steps at the end of the school day. If I needed to go to the loo during the day, I had to negotiate my way down, with the result that I don't know how I still have kidneys and bladder function at this stage. I was holding on for much of the day until I literally could not wait any longer, and then I'd have to get down the 3 steps and go to the main school where the toilets were. So how could you engage with other guys of your age in a playful way when your total preoccupation was getting through the day in as safe and as human a way as is possible, without your dignity being further eroded?
And of course, as each day goes by and they begin to develop into young men, with all the ambitions of young men, whether it's chasing each other around the yard, sport, meeting up in John's house later on after school, and then eventually, of course, chasing girls. All of this is just within your grasp, but never really there.
And I think that's the frustrating part of it all. If it was way out of my grasp, maybe I could have accepted. But as you say, it was just within my grasp. I could see, I mean, I say it in the book as well, I could see girls going out with real shits. And I was thinking, God, he treats her like crap. I wouldn't do that. But yet, that was just out of my grasp and never would be within my grasp. And things like that, it was that kind of head-wrecking stuff that it was the concoction that really was amounted to total frustration, and with the result, I began to despise my disability so much.
2FM. In studio, our guest this morning, the author of Walk Away and Forget Him, Gerry Maguire. Gerry was born with spina bifida, has lived with spina bifida, and grudgingly lived with it. He is not here to celebrate his disease or even his achievements. He's here to remind us of how difficult, how dark living with disability can be. Did you make friendships in school, in primary and secondary school, did you?
Oh, there's no doubt I did. I mean, I would be being disingenuous to the guys in secondary if I said I didn't. But again, there was a level to which that friendship went to. I mean, at lunchtime, the friends that I would have made would have gone off to play football in the yard with the other guys, and I watched on basically, or they would have gone to play basketball or Gaelic for the school, and again, that wasn't something that I could have done. So there was a kind of a cut-off point that the friendship would have had. But I did make some good friends, and sadly I didn't keep them, as many of us don't, after secondary. But I don't want to paint a picture that I was isolated or put myself into isolation during secondary.
No, because frequently children, despite the very frightening stories that are in the books about bullying, and it is very serious bullying, to bully the disabled guys, it's gold-plated bullying, you'll really get top of the class for bullying there. But kids can also sometimes be brilliant because they don't see the disability. They just see you. The better ones do.
Well, I found that in 5th and 6th year, there was one guy in particular who was the real funny guy, and we became great buddies. And I think he helped to bring out the funny side of me as well. And we had great crack in 5th and 6th class. We got through those 2 years brilliantly. And it was that kind of thing that people, he saw beyond the disability. And then with the result that other people saw beyond the disability. But I didn't see beyond the disability. I still had the disability.
And that coloured everything.
It did, yeah.
5th and 6th, when women, as far as I recall, women and the possibility of getting a motorbike or a car, and there was no chance of getting a car, motorbike maybe, but women certainly, I mean, you thought about sex every 20 seconds. And of course, you were no different.
Absolutely not, and still haven't.
So it's one thing to be hampered by just being a gawky idiot of 16 or 15, who's dreaming of a woman who actually has no mind but just a beautiful body who'll actually fall into your arms, and that doesn't happen. But another thing then to be living with spina bifida and having the same feelings.
I
She
think
must have nearly gone completely mad.
well, it's the perception that people have that if you have a disability, you're in some ways asexual. You know, that I mean, I say it in the book, right? I'm a disabled man, but the blood of passion still courses through my veins the same way it does in every other man. I mean, I can still look at a woman lustfully, just because I may not be able to chase after her as quick as other guys literally can, doesn't mean that I can't lust after her. I love the company of women, I always will do. But you do have this idea that you're playing catch up all the time.
Yeah. How did you deal with that when you were, at that, like, that explosive age?
It was, I took the step of, I still tried. I didn't say to myself, there's no point in asking because they'll say no. I still put myself out there, and if they said no, we moved on. But there came a time when you said to yourself, Christ almighty, is this really worth it, Because they're just seeing the disabled person.
The very first thing they see is the disability.
Yeah, that's it.
Did you get any yeses?
There was a couple, yeah, there was. But pretty soon, because of the limitations that the disability imposed on places we could and couldn't go, it probably just became too much of a hassle for them.
And I presume lurking then in the background is constantly, well, if we do get it together, how's that going to work out?
Absolutely, yeah. And
what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Who's going to take whose clothes off? What way will this work? Will we need a third party?
This is the thing. And I mean, I had this idea in my teens thinking, right, if we get to the point of mad passion, how do I say, oh, hang on a second, I've got a couple of stone of metal on my legs here, I just have to take these off first, that kind of. I
presume you dreamt of a button you could press and it would all just fly off.
Well, I used to loosen the straps fairly quietly, Gerry, so that if that did happen, they'd come off pretty quickly.
You'd be ready to go.
Yeah. But I mean, that was another consideration, so.
Yeah, but also the unspoken, the impossible to utter consideration.